Death Stranding. I genuinely don't think I have played a game that has given me such mixed feelings on it. I've played good games, I've played bad games, and I've played mediocre games. And usually when I play these games, I can comfortably fit them into one of these three categories. But Death Stranding is an enigma that has elements of all three of these categories. There's some good parts, there's some bad parts, and there is some painfully average parts. But despite my thoughts on this game, I can clearly recognise that this is one of those games that depends on the person playing it. Most people are either going to love it or they're going to hate it, and I think that's true for most Kojima games anyway. Whilst we're on the subject of Kojima, I think that it is important to talk about some stuff that happened with him a few years before Death Stranding came out. Now, I'm sure that Kojima is a man that needs no introduction, but if you somehow haven't heard of him, firstly, what rock have you been living under? And secondly, Kojima garnered his fame from the Metal Gear Solid series, where at the time he was working for the company Konami. At around the time of 2014 to 2015, Kojima and Konami were clashing over Kojima's vision for artistic large console games and Konami's shift into small-scale, low-cost mobile and pachinko games. Tensions rose to a boiling point with the development of Metal Gear Solid 5 costing a lot of money that Konami did not want to spend. I'm gonna make my little dick sucking hole a bit wider because I still can't breathe properly through this. You guys don't understand how much better this feels. Konami would then publicly remove Kojima's name from all Metal Gear Solid branding, even barring him from the 2015 Game Awards where the game won numerous accolades and infamously cancelled Kojima's next game, which was going to be a Silent Hill reboot featuring Norman Reedus as the main character. Obviously, with all of these events, Kojima made the decision to leave Konami and start his own independent studio named Kojima Productions, and Death Stranding would be his first game since these events happened. Anyway, now that I've talked a bit about this game's history, how about we move on to the gameplay? The gameplay is where I think it's going to be very hit or miss for most people, and I'm not gonna lie, it's a very rough first 6 hours, followed by a game that can be very hit or miss depending on the person. And it probably does take about 6 hours to actually really get a good feel for this game gameplay wise, because the story takes precedent here, but I'll get more into that later. Just sticking with the gameplay for now. The best way I can describe this game is if you were to watch The Lord of the Rings, but they forgot to cut out all the footage of Frodo and all the characters walking. Now, I understand most people hate games like this and give them the label of walking sim. I personally don't mind them as long as the story and world are engaging, and I do definitely think that they're better off as very short, like maybe 6 to 15 hour experiences at the most, not nearly 100 hours like Death Stranding is. It's not all bad though, the traversal in Death Stranding is more engaging than your typical walking sim, and the game spices things up with stealth and fighting sections every now and again. However, after a while, even with these sections, they can start to feel kind of boring, leading me to essentially beeline the main story, without interacting with much of the side stuff. In most open world games, I do eventually start to just go straight for the main story after a while, but I felt like with Death Stranding it happened way sooner than what normally happen in, like, say a Far Cry game or even an Assassin's Creed, like a Ubisoft game. I stick around for the side stuff longer than I did in this game. I think there is a missed opportunity to add some of the story elements into the actual gameplay. So I'll get more into it in my story section, but when you kill a person in this game, it essentially their body turns into a nuke and they become a ticking time bomb. You get a lot of non-lethal weapons to mitigate this so you can't just kill people. But for example, there is a gun called the bowler gun, which just shoots a big rope at the enemies and it ties them up and you can run up and knock them out. So I figured, what would happen if I tied up one of these enemies and they fell over in a river? Would they drown? And I'd have to prioritize saving them and stopping them from dying to stop them from becoming a big bomb. No, what happens is they fall over and then they float face up and they get knocked unconscious, and you don't have to worry about saving them. And even like running people over in cars, I would run into people full speed and it would never kill them, it'd always just knock them unconscious. I feel like this is a missed opportunity to really prioritize not killing them a lot more. It feels, if you have a non-lethal weapon or you're just running into the car, it is actually harder to kill someone. Like they just always get knocked out, and I think them having the higher chance of dying would make the combat a lot more interesting. Moving on to the story, and yeah, it is very confusing and convoluted, and I definitely don't think it explains itself in a very cohesive way. I really tried my best to understand what was happening, and I think I got the gist of it, but I don't think I can really explain it properly, so here's the Wikipedia synopsis. The game is set in an apocalyptic United States where a cataclysmic event known as the Death Stranding caused beach things, or more commonly BTs, invisible creatures originating from the beach, lands thought to be unique to each person that are typically visited during near-death experiences and are said to be linked to the afterlife, to begin roaming the earth. BTs are created from the dead via necrosis, and when they consume a living human being, they create an explosion on the scale of a nuclear bomb known as a void out. They produce rain known as timefall that rapidly ages and deteriorates whatever it hits. These events damage the country's infrastructure, leading to its remaining population to confine themselves to remote colonies known as not cities, which come from the remaining United Cities of America. I was going to bore you guys with the entire Wikipedia plot synopsis here, but all you really need to know is that it is very fucking confusing, and all of the jargon I just mentioned never properly gets explained. It's fine to have a convoluted story, and in fact I do like games and movies that have convoluted and complex stories, but Death Stranding's story feels very unfocused. There's no moment where all of these elements come together and allow the player to finally understand what's happening and give them that, light bulb moment. It just vomits all of this shit out at you in a more confusing way than this Wikipedia article, then expects you to know and understand what's happening right away. This may be considered more of a gameplay issue as well, but sometimes in cutscenes you will be introduced or told about a new game mechanic or equipment item, then once you get out of the cutscene you will get another tutorial on that item by the same character that just talked to you about it in the cutscene, and they will blabber on about it for fucking ages. And if I'm saying during a cutscene, please shut the fuck up whilst the character is talking, then that's a sign they're talking for way too long and they aren't really saying anything of substance. Now, before I fall victim to this rambling and babbling on like most characters do, I'm going to give my final thoughts. I think Death Stranding has extreme potential, but definitely lacks focus. If the gameplay were fleshed out and the story tightened up a lot more, it would be a slam dunk. And from what I've heard, Death Stranding 2 dust is, and I'm excited to see how Kojima has improved what Death Stranding 1 set up. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Bye.